And we have three really dynamic speakers today that I'm really excited about. I'm going to introduce all three of them. They're each going to speak in succession, and then we'll have some time for questions and dialogue following that. The first speaker is Dr. Jane Hong. Jane is Associate Professor of History at Occidental College and the author of Opening the Gates to Asia, a Trans-Pacific History of How America Repealed Asian Exclusion, published on the University of North Carolina Press in 2019. Her current project, under contract with Oxford University Press, traces the history of Asian American evangelicals since the 1970s. A public historian, she appears in 2 episodes of the PBS docuseries Asian Americans, serves on the editorial board of the Journal of American History, and has written for the Washington Post and Los Angeles Times. Hong received her PhD in history from Harvard and her BA from Yale. Our second speaker today is Dr. Kelly Fong. Kelly Fong is a 5th-generation Chinese-American historical archaeologist and Asian American Studies scholar. She has taught in Asian American Studies, history, and anthropology at multiple universities in Southern California, including UCLA, where she's currently a continuing lecturer in Asian American Studies. Dr. Fong is also the co-director of the AAPI multimedia textbook at the UCLA Asian American Studies Center, a narrative project that seeks to bring Asian American Studies to high school classrooms across the country. And last but not least, Virginia Nguyen is a history teacher at Portola High School in Irvine, California. In addition to being a teacher and a district leader, Virginia facilitates workshops and advocates for equity and justice in education. A teacher for almost 20 years, she's committed to fostering school communities that center student voice, belonging, and empowerment. So we're just going to be going in the order of listed in the program. So I'm going to turn it over to Jane.
Awesome. Hello, good afternoon, everybody. And I wanted to first thank the amazing organizers of this conference. So I attended this morning on Zoom, but even over Zoom, I could tell just how engaged folks were, and the questions were fantastic. And I'm hoping to weave some of the questions that were raised earlier into some of the conversations and topics I'll raise for us. So let me just talk a little bit about how we can connect Korean American histories to Asian American histories. And this is a lot of what I do in my work. Oh, I don't think it's moving. So I think some of the themes that I found really interesting in this morning's conversation, so Irvine City Council member Tammy Kim urged us to talk about the complex histories that were entangled within Korean American, early Korean American immigration, the ambivalent role of U.S. missionaries and Christian figures, complex histories dealing with figures like Syngman Rhee, the first president of South Korea, who spent more than half of his life in the United States and ultimately died in Hawaii. And so thinking about these questions, I mean, these are things I think about all the time, especially in my current book, where I'm looking at Christianity and particularly evangelicalism. Thinking about the longer history and how it shaped Korean America and continues to shape Korean America today. So in terms of my work, I mean, so my first book, which I'll talk a little bit about in the context of our topic for today, my first book looks at the repeal of Asian exclusion laws. I look at Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, and South Asians, so Indian Americans. And the book draws from U.S. archives, Philippine archives, and Indian archives to think about kind of how U.S. empire in Asia led to the repeal of the exclusion laws between the 1940s and 1960s. I'm also really interested in Korean American history particularly. So I have to say, as a historian, I think a lot about the politics of who writes the histories. And I think from all of our different vantage points in the K-12 classroom, you teach the same thing, the perspective, everybody brings bias. And power dynamics are everywhere. And if you ignore power dynamics, you actually risk distorting history. You risk distorting the entire story. So when I think about even within the academy, so I did a field in modern Korean history. So I'm a U.S. historian by training, or I do U.S. in the world, which is its own subfield within U.S. history, an increasingly dominant one, where it's basically the U.S. and everyone else in the world. But I did one of my graduate fields in Korean history at Harvard with Carter Eckert. And so in thinking about kind of who in the academy writes modern Korean histories, There's a lot of kind of things to unpack even there. When I think about scholars like Carter Eckert, Bruce Cummings, these are names you might have heard. Michael Robinson is kind of one of these examples as well. Many of them are actually alumni of the US Peace Corps in Korea, South Korea during the 1960s. And I think there's a lot of kind of complex history to unpack there. Within the US Academy, folks who do Korean American history are very few and far between. So I can probably count on maybe on 3 or 4 hands, the number of scholars in the secular academy who are writing about Korean American history. And so it really is a field where there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of things still left to be talked about. And so I think those are also things I think about as I think about some of the topics I'm going to talk about today. I'm just going to overview a few kind of choice subjects and thinking and kind of trying to model for us how we might think about Korean Americans in the context of broader Asian immigration and broader Asian American communities. So I'll just do a very broad snapshot view of several kind of episodes, and if folks have questions later, I'd love to field them. And some of this does build on, I think, several topics folks raised this morning, so I'll speak more briefly about some of them. So first, when I think about Korean immigrants to the US, I think this morning we heard about kind of, again, the role that US missionaries have played in thinking about the early Korean migration to Hawaii. But when you think about it from the perspective of Asian American history, the reason that Koreans were being recruited to come to Hawaii is that Chinese exclusion in the United States, which initially was passed in the 1880s, in 1902, the US expanded Chinese exclusion to Hawaii and the Philippines. So Chinese migration was basically cut off to Hawaii. And by that time, Japanese migrants had become an increasingly large percentage of the workforce on sugar plantations, but they were beginning to get demanding. And so for Hawaii sugar planters, Japanese Americans, as there were more and more of them, and as they began to demand more rights and to actually strike and to demand kind of greater wages, sugar planters were incentivized to look elsewhere in Asia for other sources of inexpensive labor. And that's where Horace Allen and other kind of Presbyterian Methodist missionaries kind of stepped into the gap. And so when we think about early Korean immigration, we have to think about that history as well, how it's embedded in broader kind of Asian American history and immigration. The other thing too, in the middle, you'll see Korean picture brides. This is a story I think many of you might know about, but I think many folks don't know about. So Korean picture bride migration, this was an example of how after Korea comes under Japanese influence and later formal colonial rule, a lot of Korean migration follows the structures and the limitations and restrictions of Japanese migration. And so Japanese picture brides were actually the main source. So there were over 10,000 picture brides from Japan who came to the US by the 1920s. Koreans were allowed to come under similar structures because by that point, Koreans were Japanese colonial subjects. We have about 1,000 Korean picture brides coming between 1910 and 1924. And the last, of course, is post-65 Asian immigration, which is basically when the Korean American population exponentially grew. This is also when many folks, maybe in the room today, came under the 65 Immigration Act. My mom came under the 65 Immigration Act. My shiomani, or my mother-in-law, my parents-in-law also came under 65. And that's really when Korean America, grows much longer and also becomes increasingly diverse. I'm still having some issues here. So, do you mind going to the next slide? Or
I'll do it. I got it.
I can actually stand too. Okay, thank you.
Just tell me when you want.
Thank you. The next kind of big episode I wanted to think about is the Korean independence movement, which I think for many folks, when you think about where Koreans fit into the story, you think about Tanil-Undong, or the March 1st movement in 1919, and you think about people like Dr. Philip Jason, who marched to Independence Hall in Philadelphia holding signs. You can see some of these in the middle. And how Koreans in the United States actually, in many ways, through their funds and through their donations, they basically funded most of the global Korean independence movement. I think there are historians like Richard Kim who have done very good work on this. It's a lot of their dollars. Actually funded the Korean Provisional Government that was set up in China in 1919. And there are many of the people who kind of bring Korean independence to the attention of people in Washington, D.C., like Woodrow Wilson and others. And so, Syngman Rhee, Lee Syngman does have a big role in this story, which is why he's kind of well-positioned to take power or to become a U.S. ally or partner after 1945. What I look at in my first book, however, is when you think about anti-colonial movements among Asian Americans, the Koreans are only one of many groups who are fighting for independence. And these are different stories, and I don't try to collapse them together. That's a lot of what historians do. We want to preserve the particularities and we want to respect the differences between movements. But there is something to be said about thinking about Korean independence, the movement, within the context of Philippine independence, which is happening at the same time. Many of you know the Spanish-American War. The United States acquires the Philippines from Spain in 1898. What fewer people realize is that the Philippine-American War immediately follows the Spanish-American War. Filipinos on the ground in the Philippines are fighting the United States because they don't want another colonizer. They don't want the Spanish, but they also don't want the Americans. And there is a US component, there's a diaspora component to this story as well. And so I looked at that in my book as well. And that's a big part, I think, of these early movements. Beyond their Indian independence from Great Britain, many fewer people know about this history, but the United States actually features really centrally, and California actually features very centrally. So Indians have been fighting for independence from Great Britain for quite a long time. In 1913, a group of Indians living in the Bay Area come together and they form the Gadda Party in 1913. It's actually headed by a Punjabi Hindu, Har Dayal, who's at Stanford at this time, and some other students at Berkeley. And eventually, so it moves from being an elite movement, and eventually a lot of California's Sikh farmers are actually some of the main actors in this movement. And they're all really different people, but they come together around Indian independence. And this is a huge movement. They actually, 8,000 people leave the United States and try to go back to India to help overthrow the British Raj. And this is all kind of part, again, of this kind of larger Asian American and also just US story about kind of anti-colonial movements and the people in the United States who are fighting for homeland independence, giving to the movement, organizing in different ways. I think that's an important thing for us to remember. Next slide.
Can you try it one more time?
Oh, sure. There we go, thank you. And this culminates in the broader story, that I look a lot at my book. My book really centers Asian decolonization along with the Cold War. In the post-1945 period, Korea has a really, really turbulent history. And I don't think most people even know kind of what happened between 1945 and 1950, so there's that dimension to the story. But the United States is really at the center of that story. But the United States is actually the center of the story of Asian decolonization. It's really, decolonization happens first in Asia, then it spreads to other parts of the globe, including Africa. This is really this is the biggest story of the 20th century, decolonization. This is when you go from a world that's majority colonial to a world that is now majority independent nation states. And the independent nation states who gain independence are people of color in Africa, Asia, and other parts of the world. And that has a huge implications for global power politics. But I think even within Asia, you have to think about kind of where Korean Americans are, what they're thinking about, how they're envisioning their post-war nation, right? Because the diaspora remains really important in shaping kind of this history as well. This is another kind of international dimension of the story, or trans-Pacific dimension that I think also deserves consideration. I think we've heard some about the 1960s Asian American movement. I'm not going to speak at length. We did have Korean Americans participating. There was a Christian component to this movement, which I fleshed out in the first chapter of my second book. There were also pro-democracy movements that involved Korean Americans, as well as pro-democracy movements that involved Filipino Americans during the 70s and 80s. And so when I think about kind of pro-democracy movements, I think about it as a kind of pan-Asian movement. I also, know about many kind of non-Korean American activists who were involved in, opposition to the Park Chung-hee regime. So it's not simply a Korean American kind of diaspora story. In many ways, you could argue it's actually much broader than that. There's a lot more I could say about World War II, but feel free to ask questions. And then the movement to free Cho-Soo Lee, there's a really great documentary that came out earlier this year, and I think it's going to be aired on PBS next year. I would really recommend and commend it to you all to watch. This is a really interesting moment. The movement to free Cho-Soo Lee, I think, is an important, often overlooked episode of Korean American history and also Asian American history. Cho-Soo Lee was a 21-year-old working-class Korean immigrant who was arrested and wrongly incarcerated for murder in 1973. And he remained in jail for many years. And the murder case against him was incredibly weak. And in fact, he was accused of murdering a Chinese gang leader. The reality is, most likely, it would have been the perpetrator was actually a Chinese gang leader. But there was kind of mistaken identity. There was a lot of kind of racist mistaken identity involved in this case. So it kind of raised a lot of questions about racism in the criminal justice system. Many of you might know the name K.W. Lee, the journalist. He's really the one who raises a lot of attention or brings a lot of attention to this case. He writes for the Sacramento newspaper, Sacramento Union, in the late 1970s. And the thing I really like about, these images here is you get to see that the Charles Lee Defense Committee, it's a pan-Asian American justice movement. The other thing that really is meaningful to me, since I'm writing about kind of churches and the role of religious organizations, you do see on the bottom left Mahimani and Humble, right, who are kind of agitating for him. But I also, in the documentary, you'll see there are like church 목사님, so pastors, you have 권사님들, you have 집사님들 who are kind of church leaders who are also mobilizing on behalf of Charles Lee, who in many ways is not a model minority. He's a working class immigrant. He actually has a record, a kind of juvenile arrest record. He doesn't go to fancy schools, right? So there's a way in which he is, in many ways, he disrupts a lot of narratives that people had about Asian Americans, particularly in this period, right after kind of the popularization of the model minority beginning in the late 1960s. And the last is, right, thinking about the much more complex histories that bring Korean Americans into conversation with other Asian Americans. The reality is, I think many folks know this, especially folks living in California, right? There is a very large percentage of undocumented Korean Americans. As of 2019, I have read that Korean Americans make up one of the largest undocumented Asian American communities, even though folks may or may not like to talk about that reality. Today, there are more than 200,000 undocumented Korean migrants living in the US. And I just wanted to highlight Teresa Lee, who some of you might know. Teresa Lee was actually the, quote, first dreamer. So many of you probably heard of the DREAM Act. It took a long time and executive action, right, to get it passed. This is the legislation that gave opportunities for young undocumented migrants who came to the U.S. as children to be given a pathway to legal status or some kind of temporary legal status. That bill was actually introduced in 2001. And it was in response to Teresa Lee, who was a talented musician. She was born in Brazil, but she was a South Korean, South Korean background. She moved to the US, and she is the reason why Dick Durbin of Illinois introduces legislation. It is set to pass, but then 9/11 happens, and that basically foils its chances for many years to come. And so when we think about people like Teresa Lee, she doesn't fit many of the narratives folks have about Korean American history, but she brings Korean American history into direct conversation with other Asian American histories, as well as Latinx histories and the histories of other people of color in really important ways that I think we should also consider. Thank you.
Next speaker is Kelly Fong.
Thank you everyone for the invitation to come speak here today, and I'm really honored to be on this panel, right, with some amazing folks. I want to apologize that I tend to just script my things to make sure that I'm on time, so bear with me as I'm reading, but know that I am looking up at you and seeing and engaging, right? Okay, so here we go. So over 50 years ago, Asian American studies emerged from the imaginations of students and community activists who envisioned a more relevant and accessible education that would help learners grapple with racism and build a more equitable and just society. While Asian American studies and ethnic studies classes, programs, and departments have developed on college campuses and K-12 classrooms across the country over the past half century, the struggle for Asian American studies continues today.
You have to just click on, you got to click on the PowerPoint.
Click on the PowerPoint, yeah. Excellent, thank you. In support of these efforts, the UCLA Asian American Studies Center, or the AASC, launched the Asian American and Pacific Islander, or AAPI, multimedia textbook, a narrative change project that seeks to bring Asian American studies into every classroom. To develop this textbook, the AASC draws from over 50 years of experience in building partnerships across disciplines and between the university and the community, training the next generation of leaders through Asian American Studies courses, research opportunities, and internships, leading cutting-edge AAPI scholarship at one of the largest hubs for Asian American Studies faculty in the nation, and transforming policy to advocate for AAPI communities. Currently under development with the intent to launch in 2025, the AAPI Multimedia Textbook brings together distinguished scholarship, open access technology, and ethnic studies pedagogy with the intent of deepening public knowledge about AAPI communities and strengthening historical empathy. The need for Asian American studies content and classes became particularly evident during the COVID-19 pandemic that exacerbated existing inequities and made Asian American and Pacific Islanders and other Black, Indigenous, and people of color even more vulnerable to disease, economic precarity, labor extraction, and death. Likewise, the spike of anti-Asian racism revealed a dire need for free, publicly accessible resources capturing the diverse histories and experiences of AAPI communities. And I know you all know this, right? That's why we're here. Ethnic studies graduation requirements in public schools and colleges represent an opportunity to create a minimum baseline of knowledge about the long excluded histories and experiences of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. And those who have fought for ethnic studies and Asian American and Pacific Islander studies to be included in K-12 and college curricula should be commended for their continued dedication and that hard work. One major roadblock, however, is that we know that access to quality educational resources informed by top scholarship on Asian American and Pacific Islander topics, along with teachers equipped to instruct on the subject, particularly in public high schools, and this is something that we continue to struggle with. When completed, the AAPI Multimedia Textbook, we're hoping will address some of these issues by becoming a one-stop website for educators seeking curated scholarly materials and curricula on AAPI communities with content geared for high school, community college, and lower division university students, as well as lifelong learners. Centering the needs of teachers and learners, our project team focuses on 4 key areas that comprise the core of our approach. First, we seek to bring over 50 years of scholarship on AAPI communities to broader audiences. Much of this content has been locked behind publisher paywalls or academic jargon, making this knowledge less accessible to audiences outside the academic ivory tower. We are working with leading scholars from across the United States and Pacific to create content specifically developed with high school learners in mind. Second, we aim to provide teachers with the tools they need to teach this content in their classrooms. We know that teachers are exceptionally busy professionals with many demands on their time and energy, and consequently, often lack the time to seek out new content and curricula. Consequently, we seek to create and curate trusted content and curricula that is easy for teachers to find and to use. We are working with experienced teachers and curriculum developers to create curriculum that is culturally resonant, ready to use, and grounded in ethnic studies pedagogy. Third, we want to build a dynamic, engaging, open access online platform that captures the intention and imaginations of learners of all ages. We recognize that a digital platform provides possibilities to engage learners beyond the traditional text that can literally put the images and voices of history in the hands, eyes, and ears of learners. Our technology team is developing an interactive website that provides an immersive experience that will appeal to students of various learning styles. And finally, we know that providing content and resources alone are not enough to bring Asian American studies into every classroom, and we seek to build teacher capacity and confidence in teaching about AAPI communities in their classrooms. Asian American and Pacific Islanders only represent about 7% of the US population and only about 2% of K-12 teachers. So a resource that supports learning and confidence for teachers of all ethnic and racial groups of backgrounds is vital. Consequently, the AAPI Multimedia Textbook Project will include a teacher training component that will provide a foundation in Asian American studies for teachers and help teachers of all disciplines integrate AAPI-related content into their existing curricula. The AAPI Multimedia Textbook will be organized into modular chapters aimed to provide the flexibility for teachers seeking to integrate AAPI history and experiences into their classrooms. In our first edition, we plan to launch 50 chapters, which will introduce learners to the histories, struggles, cultures, and contributions of AAPI communities in the United States. Chapters fall into several broader categories, which you can see on the PowerPoints. Our 4 foundational chapters cover major themes in AAPI history, including global capitalism and migration, war and empire, race, power, and identity, and community building and social justice. Designed as the first 4 chapters that learners will begin with, the foundational chapters provide a broad introduction to AAPI history while contextualizing AAPI experiences within broader contexts and themes that weave throughout history. Our group overview chapters provide histories of the largest Asian American and Pacific Islander groups in the United States. And finally, we have chapters that provide a more focused look into specific people, places, and events in AAPI history. Collectively, these chapters will provide teachers with the structure and flexibility to introduce AAPI content into the classrooms and equip learners with a strong foundation in Asian American and Pacific Islander history and community experiences. And what you see here on the slide is just a partial table of contents. So know that our table of contents, we know that like the first edition is going to have 50, but with all the information and suggestions that we've gotten from people, there's over 100 different topics that could be expanded right in this textbook. So to give you a sense of what these would look like, I actually have 2 teasers for a glimpse into these chapters. Dr. Mei Nai is offering a chapter based on her book called The Lucky Ones to look at a court case named Tate versus Hurley, which is a key California Supreme Court case that spotlights how Asian Americans were part of the legal challenge against segregation decades before Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. So drawing from the inquiry design model, each chapter features something called a compelling question to entice learners to think about the core issue the chapter has and that broader relevance and resonance beyond a single chapter's content. For this particular chapter, learners will grapple with the question, is integration possible, to continue the longer histories of racial segregation in schools that connect to the present. My next teaser, featuring Jane. Dr. Jane Huang is authoring the Korean American chapter that will provide learners with an overview of key moments in Korean American history. Drawing upon her research and teaching in Asian American history, Dr. Huang poses the following compelling question to guide learners through the Korean American experience. How have Korean Americans envisioned and fought for freedom across history? To help learners answer this question, the chapter will cover a range of key historic moments, including the Korean War, the movement for Chol-Sul-Lee, and Saigu. Moreover, to connect to the young learners today, the chapter will also explore the rise of Korean popular culture since the 1990s. Each chapter will feature a range of curated digital objects and/or multimedia that bring the narrative to life and engage learners through different mediums that take advantage of the textbook's digital format and technology. Students will have archival materials at their fingertips, including historic photographs, political cartoons, legal documents, newspaper, art, artifacts, and personal documents. These materials will provide students with a glimpse of life in that historic moment that they are studying, as well as a pedagogical opportunity for teachers to introduce primary source documents and learning into their classrooms. Multimedia, such as clips from videos and oral history interviews, bring the content to life with audio and visuals, allowing learners to hear about history in the words and voices of those who experienced it firsthand. This is a powerful tool that humanizes historic content and provides a pathway for building historical empathy. Other interactive digital objects and multimedia include timelines, story maps, and discussion prompts. Collectively, these elements aim to introduce content beyond narrative text and to provide learners with a multitude of opportunities to discover and connect with history through a range of mediums that engage multiple senses. Perhaps the most unique aspect of the project is our highly collaborative approach. For chapter development, our project team draws upon a diverse lineup of experts, including scholars, high school educators, curriculum developers, ethnic studies pedagogy specialists, teacher training facilitators, and education technology developers. And I want to say that a number of people in this room, including also Virginia on this panel, are part of this project. It's really exciting to be here. Development begins with the recruitment of a chapter team, which includes at least one content expert scholar to author content, paired with at least one high school educator or curriculum development professional to create lesson plans and activities. Instead of a linear process where the scholar hands over completed content to the teacher to develop curriculum, we encourage chapter teams to work collaboratively and iteratively. The team approach allows us to draw upon the strengths of experts in different fields and center the needs of our primary target audience, high school teachers and high school learners. The AASC staff works closely with each chapter team, providing support through the entire process from developing chapter ideas and answering questions to finalizing content before handoff to our tech team, who brings the chapter to life on the digital platform. Our broader project team features a constellation of experts from many fields and industries to make this ambitious project happen. In addition to the scholars, teachers, and curriculum developers on chapter teams, our core project team at the AASC, we have been building relationships with institutional partners, working with technology experts, including website designers and UI/UX designers, and developing advisory councils. So to give you a sense of what one of our advisory councils looks like, this is our Scholar Advisory Council, and it includes over 50 leading AAPI scholars from across the country and the Pacific who provide feedback and guidance for the textbook. You might recognize some of the names that are on this list. And some members are also authoring chapters for this textbook. So we also know it is impossible for us to complete this project alone. Consequently, our collaborative approach also includes working with educational institutions, including institutional collaborators for the entire project and chapter collaborators for specific textbook chapters. Currently, we're collaborating with 2 key institutions, the Smithsonian Asian and Pacific American Center, as well as the National Education Association, which is the largest teachers union and the largest union in the country. Our collaboration for these 2 organizations is instrumental in developing a textbook that is relevant and usable for teachers, and in making sure the textbook lands in the hand of teachers across the country. Our chapter partners are more focused on content and expertise of specific organizations or archives and chapter content. For our Japanese American incarceration chapter, for instance, we are collaborating with Densho, the premier archiving resource related to World War II incarceration of Japanese Americans, as well as the Yuri Education Project, a team of experienced curriculum developers and teacher trainers. Our list of collaborators will grow as the AAPI multimedia textbook continues its development. Ultimately, our goal is to create an engaging textbook that will be widely used nationally for its high quality and relevant content, engaging prose and aesthetics, interactive features, and ease of use for teachers, students, and lifelong learners across a range of disciplines. And in doing so, we hope that this project brings relevant education to the next generation of learners and leaders, fosters historical empathy, and builds a future that includes a more equitable and just democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. And our third speaker is Virginia Nguyen.
I'm going a little off script because as I sit here, I cannot help but feel so lucky to be in a room with these boss women who are out there changing the world and teaching. You're teaching me so much so I can bring it back to my classroom. So I just have to fangirl for a moment with Dr. Ha, Dr. Fa, Dr. An, Dr. Wu, Dr. Jun, who I just met, but can't wait to dive into your work. But like, I just cannot believe that this is out there because when I was going through college, and I went to college here, I was struggling to go through the UCI program of studies and look for educators and look for classes that I could learn more about my Asian American history and heritage. So this shows me that we're moving forward, but we cannot move forward without K-12 educators. And so I am proud to be here to represent the K-12 educators who are already in the room. One of many K-12 educators who are committed to bringing inclusive history so that our students can see themselves, but also so that our students can learn about each other. And so I'm excited to bring this and share with you, what in Asian American studies, what can we do, and how do our California content standards, how can we use those? Oh my gosh, multitasking. So I'm here, but my co-partner, Stacy Young, could not be here. The reason I share this with you is because Stacy and I are both educators, and we saw that, after the racial reckoning and then the murder of the women in Atlanta, it was a question of, well, what can we as educators do? Because staying silent, or at least my approach has always been, if I keep teaching in the classroom, change will happen. And change does happen one by one, and that is powerful, but that is not enough. And so Stacy and I got together and said, well, what is it that we believe? What can we do? As educators, we believe that we have the ability to change the world if we all work together, but you know what we were lacking? We were lacking the tools. Because as educators going through college, I did not have access to all these wonderful teachings and learnings and academics and scholarship, I had to find and curate it myself and learn myself. And I know my colleagues out there who are K-12 educators want to do good. But without the tools, how can we? So this is where I'm excited to share with you. If you're not ready to dive in all of their books yet, there are other ways where we can incorporate it. And teacher in me wants to get you engaged. So we're gonna do a little think, pair, share if you don't mind. So with your neighbor, if you could just take a moment, and those of you who are zooming in with us, if you could just type in the chat, introduce yourself to your neighbor if you don't know each other, and then share, when you look at this image, what is it that you see? What is it that it makes you think? And then where does it lead you to wonder? Okay, just think to yourselves, like those of you at home. All right, may I have some share? You can share what you see, what you think, or what you wonder. Thank you, Dr. Kim.
I was thinking as I saw this picture, even if there's no words on my face or on my arms, that when someone sees somebody that looks like me, there are already a lot of labels that are there, and many of those labels are not very flattering, but yet that is what people see when they see somebody that looks like me. And so that's what I thought as I was sharing with my partner, Hera.
Thank you. I have two more.
I noticed that thank you so much. I noticed that it's all one color for the text, but on the circle one, it says, it crosses out the your, and then it says my fault. So it makes me wonder if the person is the one, if that's like what they said, like all of this is what the person is saying rather than, or like what they're thinking, what they're highlighting, what they're noticing rather than an outside perspective. I don't know if
That does. We have one more brave person share.
I have one.
Oh, thank you.
Let's use this. So I'm a media scholar, looking at, that's an impossible shot because it's a reflection, is that right? It's a reflection? So the word should be backwards, right? But it makes the image really powerful. But it actually in some ways makes the image more powerful, right? Because even though they should be literal in some kind of way, it's from the perspective of the woman seeing that reflection, right? And she's internalizing things, even though it's a kind of impossible image.
Thank you. So I share this image with you because this is Rebecca Wong, at the time a high school student. The New York Times had put out a call in 2020 that said, please high school students tell us how you feel. How did the pandemic make you feel? And her answer is, this is how I felt. This is how I think the world saw me, and this is how I saw myself. And I share this with you because this image for me was so striking. Because I know from my own firsthand experience in the classroom with my students that this is how they felt, that Asian American students felt this. And the students who are not Asian American accidentally came to some of these conclusions too. And so, that reminds me, oh my gosh, in my class I have so much power. And this is what I really want K-12 educators to think about, is the power we have to shape the student's identity and sense of belonging. So if a student feels like this in your class, where is our responsibility to unteach, unlearn? Give them the opportunity to see themselves in a very different way. And so the things that we're learning here from these esteemed scholars, in addition to the work that we do in the classroom, the boots on the ground work we do with our students, has the power to erase imagery like this and really change the story. Do you remember that from art So I bring this up because here in Orange County, I think we have a very special position as the third largest Asian American population in the United States, we can really be the models of what it looks like to be inclusive, but also the ability to really uplift one another so that we're not alone in our story. Right? I used to teach in Illinois, and there I felt very lonely and sometimes even othered. But when I came, and that's why I moved back here. So when I moved back here, it was like a completely different feeling because now I have this opportunity to be surrounded by so many people who can understand a lot of my experience, but more than that, who I can bring along with the journey of empowerment. And so I'm going to share with you that guess what, California has a lot of opportunities for us to include Asian American studies. This is a bit.ly or a QR code. The resources that I'm sharing are available for you. So feel free to please take the QR code if you want to drop this in the Zoom unless you have already. Thank you for doing that. So what you'll see on your phones or wherever it is you're looking at will be access to the California standards that will help you see where you can fit in Asian American studies. The key understanding here is what already Dr. Hong and Dr. Fong have already pointed out, which is that we have to find opportunities in the curriculum. Asian American studies, as much as I think it belongs in its own study, in K-12 we don't have that luxury. So what we have to do is we have to really integrate it into the American story. And this is like so timely because I'm gonna show some things that you guys already mentioned. But as I heard Dr. Hong talk about immigration and the Korean American experience, it made me realize, gosh, I don't know enough. That's the first thing. So one thing I would encourage educators to do is look to stories. Sometimes it can be a podcast. Sometimes it can, we have to think about accessibility, right? Like for us, it could be a podcast. I learned through podcasts. I learned through YouTube videos. I learned through Instagram posts. I learned through Twitter posts and just like, I'm just trying to get what I don't know so that I know what I can explore further. So what I heard from you was the Korean American immigration story, and I realized, gosh, I need to dive into that more because I can teach that when I teach immigration in my classes. K through 12, when elementary school teachers are teaching about family history, they can use a Korean American story to talk about family history, even if they have no Korean students in the class. Right, so we have so many opportunities to bring in inclusive history that doesn't have to be only if you have that standard. The standard is permission, but not necessary. You can find ways. So for example, here we have a picture of Anaheim Central School in 1898 before segregation. And I bring this up because I'd like you to see, beautiful, diverse class. You could, besides maybe the clothes, you can kind of imagine that this is like a class today. And then when we talk about the story of segregation, it's usually Brown versus Board of Education, and then here in California, Mendez versus Westminster. But what about Tate v. Hurley? That is where you bring in our Asian American history. You make it part of the American story. That is what's necessary. And here we have, I just wanted to highlight this because I thought this was so freaking bold, right? Here, Miss Tate, Maid Tate's mom writes, just because she is of Chinese descent, not because she don't dress like you, because she does, just because she is descended of Chinese parent, I guess she is more of an American than a good many of you that is going to prevent her from being educated. Like, I was like, you go, Miss Tate. Right? So as I think about all of this, I think how powerful for our students who are non-white, not just Asian American, non-white, to see a parent, a person of color stand up for their child against white people of power. This is why Asian American studies doesn't just fit into the needs of us as Asian Americans to see ourselves. This is about the whole story. How do all students benefit from this? And how do we frame it? Too much of our history and stories is framed around stories of struggle, right? And I think resilience is important, but what about joy? So I challenge our K-12 educators to think about how do we celebrate Asian Americans and their contributions. So in the document that you have, I have linked here a wakelet of resources that Stacey and I have curated that are about heroes and their accomplishments and ways to celebrate. Because that's what, when I think about, elementary school is about celebration. It's about like hope. It's about seeing and being inspired. So let's inspire them with the Asian American heroes out there too. So that's what this is. And then, how do you as a teacher reflect? How do you know what stories and images and resources you're bringing in? On that same document is a series of questions here. These are questions to help guide your own reflection when you're lesson planning and thinking about what it is that you're going to be teaching. So for instance, this is where we talk about bias and our own personal perceptions. I really like this question. Do I have assumptions or stereotypes about ethnicity of many of my Asian American students? I'm Asian American myself, but I'm Vietnamese American. So I myself have my own biases that I have to challenge and question. So I ask myself these questions too. How might these assumptions show up in our classroom? So I expect all Asian American students in my class to be or act a certain way. These will challenge us to be reflective, and that will challenge us to grow and then really bring in a more inclusive classroom experience. Also, we can replace Asian American with any other background. So this is really teaching us good pedagogy. And the why, this is my favorite part, the why. This is what happened. This is Charlotte. She is now graduated from high school, but she went to Portola High School where I teach. And Charlotte and her friend and I were on a Zoom call. It ended up almost 2 hours because I asked them the question of, hey, what's it like being an Asian American student? They were so excited to be asked that we talked for 2 hours about what that felt like. It got to the point where my kids were like, Mom, what about us? And so I just have a short clip to show you about what Charlotte says as part of her answer. I think it really encompasses what she felt as an Asian American.
I think a lot of it comes down to the way that I'm seen, because I remember like one of the biggest books that really hit me when I was younger was Inside Out and Back Again, which is about like a girl who like immigrates after the Vietnam War, and it talks about her experience kind of living in America and reconciling with her two identities and trying to figure out how to adapt to the culture. And the reason why I remember it so much is because the author incorporates Vietnamese words in there. And I remember I would get so excited whenever I saw it because, oh my God, I could actually read it and I could understand it. And it said like mẹ, it said mom, it said bố, it said dad. Like, I know what this means and it's something that hits me. And they talked about like families owning nail salons, and my aunt owns a nail salon. And so it was just something that resonated with me before I even realized that identity in literature and art could hit me as hard as I thought it ever could. And so I think just having exposure to books like that and to films like that at an early age really does mean a lot, because it kind of tells you your story is accepted and who you are as a person is accepted. And I think being able to have people see like not even just like one story of your culture, but like other aspects of your culture, like being an Asian person and not necessarily being good at math, just like having all those different perspectives and being able to know that, hey, you can be whatever you want. You don't have to fall within this little box in order for America to accept you, in order for you to feel like you can even be loved and accepted, is really powerful.
I mean, when you, oh, sorry, do you mind going back one? Thank you. When we think about Charlotte and we contrast it back with that first image I showed you, what a difference, right? What a difference. How powerful are we as educators? That Charlotte's experience is so different from that image that we saw. And it's because Charlotte had teachers who did give her plenty of affirmations about her identity, who tried to teach her not only, not knowing that Charlotte, I don't think that teacher, from what she shared with me, chose that book because of Charlotte, but chose that book because that teacher's intention was to be inclusive. But look at the impact it had on her, right? So when we think about this story and we think about how can we integrate Asian American studies into the curriculum, I guess I want to reframe the question to how can we not? We have to demand it of our colleagues. We have to demand it of ourselves. But we have plenty of tools that will allow us to do that. That handout has all of the standards it has the framework and the standards from K-12 in California. That shows you all the points in which California does say, our students have to have this knowledge. They have to know about the Chinese Exclusion Act, for example. Right, so we have that in there, but that's not the only places Asian Americans can be in this history and be in this story. And then the last one, in the words of the powerful Grace Lee Boggs, you cannot change any society unless you take responsibility for it, unless you see yourself as belonging to it and responsible for changing it. Thank you, everyone.
So, thank you for a really wonderful and inspiring panel. We have some time for engagement, for questions, for Q&A, and so please think of some questions you'd like to ask our panel. I guess I'm just going to start us off by just looking at, just reflecting and looking at the titles that you all chose, and there's one thing in common. I am in the English department as well, so they all begin with gerunds, right? Connecting, bringing, and empowering. And maybe it's just a way to kind of start us out in our discussion. I just want to give each panelist an opportunity to sort of own their gerund, and maybe talk a little bit about why you picked that word and why you think it's important. So maybe we can just go with Jane and then Kelly and Virginia.
In terms of why I chose connecting, it was a title given to me, so but I liked it, so I also went along with it. I think the reality is, I mean, for folks who are Korean American, I don't think we have to explain why Korean American history matters. But if you're not Korean American and you're not like a BTS fan or something, like there's a way that you might have to make a case for why Korean Americans are significant in these larger histories. I mean, I trained in many things, but I mean, even within Asian American history, as I suggested earlier, Korean Americans numerically, it's hard to make a case depending on where in the country you are. I'm actually from New Jersey, which is, I think, the second. New Jersey and New York City are like the second largest Korean American communities. But even over there, you know, Korean American politics, everything looks very different from California, even though there are lots and lots of Korean Americans. So in the state of New Jersey, for example, which is I think the second state or third state to approve an API history curriculum, that whole conversation looks very different from my perspective than the one in California. Even though Korean Americans make up a big percentage of New Jersey's Asian American population, Indian Americans and Chinese Americans are also a very large percentage. So I think in each context, folks need to kind of know how to connect kind of Korean American, and any group needs to know how to kind of make their community legible, and also to really just, you know, contextualize. I think for historians, we always contextualize. Context is almost everything, which is why other social scientists hate historians. They're like, oh my God, can you stop, please? Particularities are important, but they're not all that there is. And the last thing actually I wanted to say, and sorry, I don't mean to go on too long, is something that I was thinking from this morning. So in thinking back to the kind of connecting gerund, this morning someone asked a question about kind of what is the goal of history or ethnic studies education? Is it simply to create, someone asked, is it simply to create hatred and anger toward white people? And I thought that was such a great question, because I think that's something that folks think about in the back of their minds but don't say out loud. So I was actually really glad that was kind of put out there. And I just think in all these cases for ethnic studies generally, like I would argue that history provides students like a framework and a language to make sense of the racism and the inequities they will inevitably experience in the United States. And so I actually would argue that color blindness, kind of denying that race matters or is important, it leaves students ill-equipped to kind of name the oppression and racial othering they actually experience in the US. So even though there might be a period of a lot of kind of turmoil and anger upon learning these histories, in the long run, I think it actually equips students to actually understand and make sense of their experiences and to reach a place where they're able to engage in healthy ways that actually are good for everybody. So that was also something I wanted to mention.
Wow, okay, so as far as my title goes, or my gerund is bringing, in some ways it actually is the title, like larger title of the project that I walked into. So
Sorry, I didn't realize.
Bigger story is that the idea of the API multimedia textbook actually originates with the co-director of the project, who's Karen Yamamoto, who's director of the Asian American Studies Center at UCLA. And that was one of the things that she brought to the job. One hand was like bringing these resources into broader like educational spaces beyond college classrooms. The other side was the policy summit. But her sort of slogan for this is bringing Asian American studies to every home and thinking about it, bringing it into every classroom. But I think it's really key to understand that bringing is like an active thing where we can't wait for Asian American studies to come to the classroom by itself. Like we have to be intentional about bringing it to the classrooms. And ethnic studies is something that came out of struggle, right? It wouldn't have happened without the struggle of students, community members, students, faculty, you name it. And so I think that in making sure this education or these materials are more accessible, right? We have to do that work actively, right? We can't wait for someone else to do it or for it just to magically appear. So I think that's sort of explains my journey.
So I chose empowering because, well, the passion project or initiative that Stacey and I started is called Educate to Empower. And both of us went into education to one, address who we were. I mean, this is like me reflecting 20 years later. I realized I went into education to teach, to be the teacher I wish I had myself. So being able to come back into the classroom, I feel empowered to change that narrative for future students so that they don't have to experience like that invisibility that I felt. And then seeing that how much power I have to help shape my students' experiences. But also, I am hoping that what you got from this was that you all have the tools to teach Asian American studies. The next step would be the commitment to do it.
Let me open it up for questions.
For Dr. Hong, I'm curious about your research regarding the evangelical community within the Korean community. Having grown up evangelical myself, I'm wondering if you found that, does that background make it difficult to for people in the Korean community to open up to these ideas about race and identity?
I mean, I could go on at length about these questions, but I mean, that's a great question. I think, and I've given a number of talks to, so there's a Korean caucus of the PCUSA, which is the Presbyterian Church of USA. I've given like a series of talks to them, kind of thinking about the role that Korean American Christians have actually played in longer kind of in activism, in like justice movements in Korean American history. So one talk I gave last year kind of centered on this longer history. So I think a lot of that is forgotten. And I think part of that has to do with kind of the nature of US evangelicalism, which there's a really great book that just came out a few months ago by a historian named Helen Jen Kim. It's called Race for Revival, and she really connects the rise of, she connects kind of US evangelical institutions like the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, Campus Crusade for Christ, and World Vision. And she looks at kind of how US and South Korean evangelicalism and then conservative politics became entangled during the Cold War, so between the 1940s and the 1980s. My book kind of picks up in a more domestic, like I look at Asian American politics, so Pan-Asian, East Asian, Southeast Asian, to some extent South Asian American, and I look at post-65 and kind of how that looks once migrants arrive in the United States and once they have children. So, I mean, I think US evangelicalism has become increasingly conservative, and today I think folks, I hope this is somewhat legible to some folks. There's a whole field of US history where it's like, it's all evangelical or former evangelicals who study history and write about the rise of the Christian right. People like Jerry Falwell, the Christian Coalition, the National Association of Evangelicals. I think if you are Korean American, the majority of Korean Americans have some kind of connection to a Protestant church. And even if your church is technically not evangelical, evangelicalism has saturated Korean American Christianity and to some extent Korean Christianity. There are kind of more liberation theology, there are more liberal Christians in Korea, but they are not the ones who become increasingly politically powerful, both in Korea and the United States. And so I think it's something to do with the nature of US evangelical influence on Korean Americans once they arrive in the United States. That's not to say that all Korean American Christians fit that mold, but then the last thing I'll say is the reason why this also matters for Korean Americans, whether you're a scholar or not, is in the last 10 years, there has been this huge phenomena of Korean Americans becoming the leaders of the most storied, historically white evangelical institutions in the United States. So the president of the National Association of Evangelicals is named Walter Kim. He's a second-generation Korean American PCA pastor with a Harvard PhD in Near Eastern languages and civilizations. So he has kind of a biblical background. Westminster Seminary, California is led by a Korean American. The Gospel Coalition is led by a Korean American man. The PCA, which is a denomination, was led a few years ago by Alex Jung, who's a professor at Azusa Pacific University. It's a particular phenomenon, and a lot of it has to do with the history of Presbyterianism in Korea. So it's become a kind of pathway for Korean American men to become leaders in very, very white evangelical institutions. There are others too, like Eugene Cho is now president of Bread of the World, which is an evangelical kind of humanitarian organization. So they run the gamut kind of politically, but most kind of are positioned within the PCA, which is a historically more conservative, complementarian, like they don't allow women to be ordained, for example. So there's a particular way that Asian Americans and specifically Korean American men are huge kind of in evangelical politics today in ways that I think most people don't actually recognize. Thank you for that question.
Yes, I have a question as well, but first of all, I think this that curation of the library, these resources that are being provided, and teachers who are teaching Asian American Studies, they're like the first in our country, the first making history, and we just appreciate you so much, and I thought we could just give them a hand for that, just be the first one. I know when it comes to ethnic studies, more and more people are like, okay, I can see why we would teach ethnic studies. And I'm in favor of Asian American Studies and Korean American Studies as well in K-12 education. But how would you respond to somebody in a winsome way, in a loving way, in a wise way, why Asian American Studies and Korean American Studies in K through 12?
I guess my response would, I got pumped that answers a question with another question. But my first question would be like, well, how did you come to that question? Would be my first, because I think it's easy for me to assume that question is coming from a place of ignorance, but I have found, and this has really helped me navigate life with less anger, I have found that people generally ask with real curiosity. So my first question would be to respond with, I'm so curious, how did you come to that question? And then depending on where they go, but my general answer would be, it's part of the American story. It is powerful, and there's going to be a lot of opportunity for all students, not just the students who come from that ethnic and cultural background to learn. And that is really beautiful. Just like it is beautiful that we get to learn the story of American history as maybe kind of like an introduction to what the American story is. But then for those students who really want to learn more and have a deepen their knowledge and understanding of the human experience, we have to offer many other options. And so the next place I would go is, and I really hope that that's not where we end, that Asian American Studies is one place, but then I'd love us to go to Latino American Studies. I would love us to invite other cultures and communities to curate an experience for all students to learn about all kinds of cultures.
There's a question from our Zoom audience. I guess it's for Jane. Can you expand on the role of Christianity in the lives of early Korean women?
Sorry, I think I'm speaking too much, so I'll try to keep this brief. I think there were so few Korean women to begin with, because like the migrations of Chinese, Japanese early on, it was primarily a labor migration early on, so men really did dominate the migration stream. I don't know, earlier there was one slide I just went by really quickly, but I don't know if many of you know the book Quiet Odyssey by Mary Pig Lee. If you don't know this book, I mean, this is actually the first like Korean American anything I read in college in an Asian American history class. And Mary Pig Lee, you can actually hear oral history interviews with her. There's recordings at the USC library. They're all digitized. She was born in 1900 and she migrated as a 5-year-old to Hawaii. And then her family then moved to the Pachapa camp in Riverside. And then she lived all across California during a period of incredibly virulent anti-Asian racism. She also lives through World War II. She tells stories about how, she basically lived on the farm of her neighbor, her Japanese American neighbor, during the incarceration because she wanted to protect her neighbor's farm. And so she lives there and then gives the farm back once her neighbors are released from camp. So, and her life goes all the way into the 1990s. She dies in the 1990s. The book comes out in the 1990s as well. But like when I think about folks like her, she's such an anomaly because she is like one of the very few children and one of really a small number of women or females to come during those migrations. And then as I mentioned, about 1,000 Koreans came as picture brides, Korean women. But I mean, I think women are incredibly important to the lives of the church, to communities, and to the Korean independence movement as well. I think one thing that I've noticed, and I've not spent a ton of time studying the very early Korean independence movement. I know more about the 1930s and onwards. But the reality is, like, a lot of the activism and organizing happened through the labor of women. And I think within the church, outside of the church as well. And often you only hear kind of the big names like An Chang-ho, Philip Jason, Lee Seung-man. Like, these are the folks that you know. Actually, if you know anything, you know them, but I think most people don't even know those names. But if you know any of those history, you kind of know, or if you've seen the sign on the 10th freeway, you're like, oh, okay, that's someone, right? Tosan An Chang-ho, And some people know about his daughter, Susan An Cuddy, right, who becomes one of the first Korean American women in the U.S. military. So during World War II. So I mean, I think it's just another situation where, I mean, you could argue that because there are so few women, maybe the emphasis on the men is justified, but the reality is none of that stuff really would have happened if it weren't for the labor of women. And so that's an area where I wish more people would work. And I think folks like Lily Kim, if anyone knows who the historian Lily Kim is, she's writing a lot of her work focused on early Korean women. Ann Soon Choi is another historian who's worked on early Korean women. But there really isn't that much work, and so I wish there were more.
We have another online question, but maybe we can go back and forth. Is there a question?
I have a question for practically in the classroom when you're diving into these really like deep identity, soul-searching topics and questions. Like, how do you create a room where students can go there? A lot of times, encountering history, that's not something to be proud of. I know as a biracial child, having to deal with the tension between the military occupation and then what that means for the local women as well, that started to manifest in me in a different way. That's something I had to go through. But I'm a middle school teacher, so I'm wondering practically or even high school, how can you engage in these conversations, realizing that a lot of the students may discover something they necessarily don't want to maybe go deeper, even though it could be so helpful for them.
I really appreciate that question, and I would say that what you just did is a great modeling of it, where you start with a little bit of your personal self. And not all of us are ready to do that, right? And it takes a lot of vulnerability for us, but if we're asking our student community to be vulnerable, modeling it in a safe way is one of the first things that I would encourage you to do. And I wouldn't go there right away, like first day of school, hey everyone. So, but what it's, I've been spending, and Dr. Kim knows this because he is part of my Portola High School community. But belonging is the theme that our school has adopted for this year, and it's a theme that is ongoing. I mean, that's K-12 education, right? And that's how we navigate the world. But making it really clear, making it our goal so that everyone knows is important. So one of the things I would say is how, before you go into those deep questions, make sure your class, everyone feels like they belong. Because that is how you your most authentic self, the one where you're willing to go deep, the one in which you're willing to push yourself, the one in which you're willing to ask hard questions, and the one in which you're willing to ask for help, comes from a place where you already feel like you belong. So when you create that classroom community, then that other stuff will still be hard, but more manageable. You never know what the students will bring and won't bring, but it's like the first step to creating a room where those students can start to go there.
So I'm gonna ask on behalf of the Zoom audience, have these curriculum plans been proposed to K through 12 schools? If they have, can you talk on the discussion that went on with these schools and possibly adopting this curriculum?
All right, so that one's probably me. The short answer is we've started tentative discussions with LAUSD since we're based in LA. But we're not far enough along on the project yet to be able to be like, this is what we have, would you be willing to adopt this? That is our plan in the long-term plan. So we're sort of at the stage where we're really developing content and the web platform, but we're already starting to plant the seeds for what implementation would look like. So if anyone's interested in being involved around implementation, please reach out and let me know. So not yet, but if you know of a school who might be receptive, if it's your school, please reach out.
And if I can add, don't wait, propose that new class. If you're interested in teaching Asian American Studies, and Dr. Kim, I know you already did this in Anaheim, I have an ethnic studies proposal that I just put on the table for my own school. If you're interested, just put the proposal out, and see what happens, because sometimes all it takes is a teacher willing to do it and for it to get going. Waiting for it to be something that's from the top down, we can't do that anymore. The way movements happen, especially movements from our historically most marginalized communities, is grassroots. It has to be a call from the community itself. So do not wait for this, because we're talking 2025, and even then it's going to be the districts have to approve things, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
We don't have time to wait for that. We need to do it now. There's urgency. And then can I go back to that other question you asked? Because I realized I did that thing that I hate, which is I did not give you a concrete step. I just told you this big concept of belonging. But a concrete step would be start with just quiet one-on-one reflection. So after I introduce something that is deep, I like the see, think, wonder, for example, at the very beginning with that image. That is a painful image for students to see, especially Asian American students. And I did use that in my classroom. But the see, think, wonder, I did not open it up to discussion yet. I had them just take a moment to write down their responses and react. And I walked around and I looked and saw what they were responding. And from there, I tried to take a pulse of the room to see, okay, where are my students in this period feeling right now? Are they ready to go there as a group? Or is this where I go, okay, now write a quiet reflection that I'll read, and then I can decide my next steps. But so I would always start with like individual reflection that you look over so you can see which students you need to, how would you approach next? So concrete step for you.
I want to thank all of you. So proud to be able to collaborate with you. I also want to give you a suggestion. We just invited a dancer choreographer to come to CCI, and we did a workshop called Dancing Around Race. And he had the students, the participants, engage in exercise. On one side, in a circle, things that people perceive about their African identities. So it could be about their race, or their height, or their body shape, or other elements of their identity. On the other side, have them talk about what was inside them, what they see of their identity. I just thought that was such a powerful, yet simple exercise that allowed students to then share aspects of their identity that may not be visible. So I just want to offer that as a tool.
My name is Sunny Moon. I am Assistant Vice President for Institution Activities at Tech State Los Angeles. I think I may be the only administrator in this room, but don't consider me as your The only difference is you have a union and I don't have any union. So that is the only difference. I am educational researcher focusing on higher education policy analysis and educational statistician. And I Rachel is my best friend from USC, and I'm very stunned and amazed since this morning. He's done so many impactful research, meaningful research, and we have immersion program with the Korean language in Anaheim, Unified District, and Dr. Son's presentation for culturally relevant practices. That is one of my research findings a few years ago at higher education. So it's so much I learned today myself, even though there are lots of Korean immigrant histories, even I did not know that at all. So I'm learning a lot. I heard about Jane Hong in the past. You don't know me, but I heard about you. So I have questions and comments too. Let me start with my comment. Could we announce this kind of event and conferences and why it's almost kind of California statewide? Because I saw this conference information from very small part of Korean local newspaper. So I think I'm the only one who found this conference little just small Korean news.com. Sometimes I saw that, sometimes not, but the day before yesterday I saw that. Oh my gosh, this is in your sister, all right, and I want to go there. And I'm learning a lot, very amazed and impressive, a lot of good research and impact and research and the programs and teachers and teacher educators. So I really hope I want to see the broader announcement next year. And also my son is a USD high school teacher, even though he teaches in science. We do like a point to a credit-based conference that I can invite him, of course, together. And my question is, I'm a higher education administrator and a Cal State Los Angeles. We established the College of Ethnic Studies, first among the California State University system. And I'm the data person, I'm an accreditation person too. So in system-wide, we enrolled 16% of 500,000 Cal State students are Asians. And at Cal State Los Angeles, we enroll, 14% of our students are Asians. So the Asian American students and curriculum are very much impactful if we have so many Asians in the system wide at our campus too. And so I think we are focusing on K-12 today. Could I expect, or do you have any plan so that we can expand this curriculum to K-16 in the future? Because I'm the higher education administrator, also higher education researcher, and also Dr. Christian mentioned that AB 1460, government use later college, ethnic studies curriculum as a graduation requirement in college. So could we integrate all of these wonderful ideas to college ethnic studies and Asian studies curriculum? So that is my question.
So I can actually take first stab at that. So I know that I talked about this in the context of K-12 because I know, or particularly high school, because that's what the theme of this conference was. But our actual target is 9 through 14, thinking that this could also, our API multimedia textbook is not just high school, it's just, to make it accessible to ninth graders, that it can also scale up so that you can still use it in like your lower division courses, right? But we need to make sure that ninth graders can still read it and understand and engage, right? But we are hoping that it is also useful for community colleges, CSUs, lower division, and CSUs or UCs or undergraduate institutions, but also lifelong learners, because a lot of people didn't have Asian American studies when they were in college or high school. And we've had conversations with people like, oh, I missed out, I really wish I had that. So that doesn't mean that this textbook, right, or the content in this textbook wouldn't also be geared for them as well. If you just have a curious person who wants to know more about whatever topic in Asian American history. So that's the first response, that yes, we are thinking about it that way, but because a lot of us who are in some of the core team are university professors, we know that teaching in a classroom, right, in a high school classroom is very different, which is why we know we need to partner with folks like Virginia who are on the ground and know what it's like teaching, right, in a high school classroom. And so thinking about that collaborativeness is sort of where we're at.
That is awesome. Yes, and I see the trend of more and more enrollment in ethnic studies courses in Cal State. I think it was the same as other Cal State systems and other colleges too. So I am so stunned that I'm here today. Thanks to KoreaTimes.com.
May I add something too? For those of you who, guess what? I have an announcement. You do not have to wait till 2025 because UCI is going to be offering their second Teaching for Justice conference. And last year's theme was spotlighting Asian American studies. This year's theme will continue with the Asian American focus, but our theme is going to be more towards empowering teachers to teach it. So spotlighting was an introduction to it. This time it'll be like tools and inviting members of the community to come teach as well. I know you have your calendars open, eager to write this down, so I'll tell you the date. It is April 28th is Friday online, and April 29th will be in person here. Quite a few of the organizers are also that are here, and we are super excited to have you. It was so great because it brought together community members that were business owners, activists, students, teachers, scholars, and all kinds of others who came together to really learn about Asian American histories and lived experiences. And so we're doing it again. So I'll see you there.
I think
I have witnessed that because I attended that conference. It was wonderful. Anyway, just comment is, I know we are developing, now that is mandated in high school and also Cal State, we need to have a conversation with the teacher education faculty as well, because they are the one who will be training teachers. So one of the one that is coming up is in October next year. We have a California Council of Teacher Education, which is a statewide, and I'm a board member, but anyway, so we will be devoting the whole conference for teacher educators, higher ed, looking at the ethnic studies, how to implement in schools and all that. So we need to have a conversation. This is an ongoing one that we need to do in every level.
Yeah. I'm sorry to say, but your Teaching for Justice, which I attended last time too, conflicts with APAHI conference offering, which we were going to attend another Asian higher ed.
Oh,
And that particular APAHI conference last time in Long Beach, we actually ran into many people from community colleges that asked us to develop curriculum, ethics as curriculum for college level and give it to them. They want to start teaching ethics study classes in community colleges. So we actually started the discussion already with the council and the Grace and myself. So there is a movement. So right now, we're just going to focus on the high school, K to 12, until 25, when it becomes mandated, when there's a huge demand afterward. So we want to be ready for that. Then we'll focus on the college level. So it's coming.
I feel like Neo in the Matrix. I'm running back and forth. This is a great question from the perspective of a student. How can students become involved in the push for development and implementation of Asian American curriculum?
I'm going to answer that. Well, first of all, students, talk to your teachers. Demand it in your classroom. So that's step one. There's also Dear Asian Youth. If you haven't heard of them yet, they are a power group. They're on Instagram mostly. Dear Asian Youth is creating curriculum, student-led created curriculum. They meet, they are amazing. They meet virtually through Zoom, organized, and then different chapters are forming. Irvine has a chapter, I know. There's chapters all around the country, and now they've gone international. So I'll say that again, it's called Dear Asian Youth. Look them up on Instagram, and you can become a part of that student movement. But you just talk to your teachers. Ask your teachers to do it, they will. And if they won't, ask another teacher to do it. And if they won't, go to another person. I mean, you have a lot of voice and power. We ultimately, teachers serve students. So use your voices.
I was wondering if I could also respond to that same question. And students, you have such a powerful voice. I think so many students don't realize how important your voice is. In fact, a lot of change that's happened, whether it's in the United States or in Korea, came about because students advocated, students raised their voices in a kind and compassionate and thoughtful way. And so in Anaheim Union High School district, for example, it wasn't Governor Newsom's law for ethnic studies that brought ethnic studies to Anaheim Union High School district. It was students saying, we want this as a part of our learning. And then the district created a task force to talk about it a little bit more. And then now ethnic studies is being offered in many different places, including the new course that I proposed, Asian American Studies, Korean American Studies. These courses are being offered because it's the students that were asking for it and the adults who were listening. So I'm coming in as incoming school board member for Irvine School District, and if students were asking for this, I would love for students, if this was something students wanted, I would love many students to come to the board meetings, share their thoughts in a compassionate and thoughtful way, explain to us why it is that they wanted, and I would listen, and all of us would listen. So I encourage students to share their thoughts at school board meetings as well.
We have a little bit time for one or two more questions.
Thank you. I think many of you really successful individuals. And I do believe you can achieve that by yourself. I do believe the parents did a lot of job when you grew up, when they came here. They really sacrificed themselves to support you. And this legacy is kind of fade away when new generations comes. But I don't see when we teach our children, we don't teach them. I'm not blaming anybody, I'm just questioning myself. Middle school and high school, they are very sensitive age. I think, I'm afraid what they are seeing is their parents are ignoring their grandparents who had sacrificed their parents when they came here. Oh, I see that by myself. When the parents are old, they send them to a convalescent hospital rather than take care of themselves. I grew up in South Korea, that's not accepted. So somehow, high school teachers or middle school teachers incorporate that kind of a spirit to teach our children, to make sure when you have your offspring better off than you, and each generation make your children better than they are, then we become like the Jewish community. Because I was volunteering as a California Youth Authority as a teacher, I have never seen Jewish gangs. I see a lot of different communities and I can see gangs. The Jewish community, I don't know if they were organized crime that I don't know, but the youth, everybody is better off. I don't know if this question is common, but as a high school teacher, I myself, I kind of, what can I should do to teach my children, to make sure when you have your children, make sure they are better than you. So what I'm saying that, I'm saying that to everybody, every community, making sure your children are better than you. But I just thought,
as I hear you speak, it led me to reflect myself on how, at what point am I teaching that kind of legacy and respect for legacy? And I know I can do better. As I hear you speak, the first thing I think is, I really need to do better. Because there is this beautiful part of being Asian American where culturally we are, I know, and for myself, my parents are refugees, but there is this cultural expectation that we take care of, filial piety, we take care of our family, we honor them. And that can sometimes come in conflict with like the more American values that, come. I know for myself, one of the things I try to do, and this is why I choose to teach history, is that we can have compassion and understanding and respect if we know history. So that's how I try to do it, but, and try to bridge the gap between generations by encouraging conversation so that we can learn from each other. So in my own history class, I have a project called the Story Project, and the project starts, that's how we start ninth grade history, is we start ninth grade history with the invitation for students to go to their adults in their life and do a family history project. So instead of starting history with what is in a book or what the curriculum says you should start it, we start history with your own personal history and your family and your community history. And then hoping that that's one way to bridge and provide that respect, because I do know from student reflection, they say, I had no idea my parents or my grandparents or my uncle went through that. And then they presented on it, and a few of them got emotional talking about how much they didn't know and how much they have a different kind of outlook towards their family. So I think conversation and seeing that history is not something other people experience, we are a product of it.
I'll try to make this quick, but I really appreciate what you shared, and I think it's, I'm a second generation Korean American, and I recently read this book called What My Bones Know by Stephanie Fu, and in that book, she's a second generation, I think, she's Chinese American, or Taiwanese American, but she actually talks about just the trauma that migrants, particularly Asian immigrants, experience coming to the United States. I think many of us are kind of aware of that, but there's a historian named Gary Okihiro who basically says Asians came to America because Americans first went to Asia. And I think that for many historians of U.S. migration, of Asian migration, that's like really at the center of what we think about. It's kind of how did the U.S. empire in Asia at various periods create displacements and traumas that basically lead people to come here. And that's even true for people who are, quote, voluntary immigrants, because even though my parents came in 1975, my mom was a nurse, the reality is that they chose to come. Even though that's true, my mom was a nurse in large part because the United States set up nursing colleges through a long history of intervention, occupation, and what historians would call empire building. So the fact that there was even Yonsei University, or even the fact that there was like a nursing college set up in the U.S. Model, that's because of U.S. empire in Asia. And I think that's true in so many cases, I mean, in all cases, but it looks different in each case, but that history of empire creates trauma for migrants, which then passes down to the next generation in different ways. And so in this book by Stephanie Fu, she talks about kind of complex PTSD and various things, but I think that that's actually something that is difficult for second generation Asian Americans, if I'm going to speak as one, to kind of think about, because it's kind of close in some ways, and folks still have to kind of negotiate it. I mean, I have a daughter, so I'm hopeful that maybe by the third generation, right, there's a little bit of distance or something, right, so folks are able to process that. But I think, I really hear the pain that you're expressing, and I think that that is actually not just that's actually part of the story of the history itself, like the history of trauma and the trauma of migration and all the things that led to that migration in the first place. I think that's really at the center of the history of Asian immigration.
So I'm afraid I think we're gonna end this panel here. Please join me in thanking the panel.